ದಿವಂಗತ ಹರಿಹರ ಗುಂಡೂರಾಯರ ಹೆಸರಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ದತ್ತಿ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸ ಏರ್ಪಾಡಾಗಿದೆ. ಹರಿಹರ ಗುಂಡೂರಾಯರು ನಮ್ಮ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಯ ಸ್ಥಾಪಕರಾದ DVG ಅವರಿಗೆ, ನಿಟ್ಟೂರು ಶ್ರೀನಿವಾಸರಾಯರಿಗೆ, ಇವರಿಗೆಲ್ಲ ಬಹಳ ಆತ್ಮೀಯರಾಗಿದ್ದರು. ಚಿತ್ರದುರ್ಗ ನಿವಾಸಿಗಳಾಗಿದ್ದು ಸ್ವಾತಂತ್ರ್ಯ ಪೂರ್ವ ವರ್ಷಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಹಲವಾರು ವಿಧದ ಸಾರ್ವಜನಿಕ ಚಟುವಟಿಕೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರು ತೊಡಗಿದ್ದರು. ವೃತ್ತಿಯಿಂದ ವಕೀಲರು. ವಿದ್ಯಾರ್ಥಿ ದಶೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರು ಪುಣೆಯ ಫರ್ಗುಸನ್ ಕಾಲೇಜಿನಲ್ಲಿ ವ್ಯಾಸಂಗ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾಗ ಲೋಕಮಾನ್ಯ ತಿಲಕರ ದಟ್ಟ ಪ್ರಭಾವಕ್ಕೆ ಅವರು ಒಳಗಾಗಿದ್ದರು. ಹೀಗೆ ಪ್ರಖರ ರಾಷ್ಟ್ರಪ್ರೇಮ, ಅಧ್ಯಾತ್ಮಾಸಕ್ತಿ ಎರಡೂ ಅವರಲ್ಲಿ ರಕ್ತಗತವಾಗಿದ್ದವು. ಚಿತ್ರದುರ್ಗದಲ್ಲಿ ನೆಲೆಸಿದ ಮೇಲೆ ಯುವಜನಾಂಗದಲ್ಲಿ ಉನ್ನತ ಧ್ಯೇಯಾದರ್ಶಗಳನ್ನು ಬಿತ್ತೋದಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ ಬಗೆ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮಗಳನ್ನು ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಡೆಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದರು. ಆಲೂರು ವೆಂಕಟರಾಯರು, ಮುದುವೀಡು ಕೃಷ್ಣರಾಯರು ಮೊದಲಾದ ಗಣ್ಯರನ್ನು ಚಿತ್ರದುರ್ಗಕ್ಕೆ ಬರಮಾಡಿಕೊಂಡು ಅವರ ಭಾಷಣಗಳನ್ನು ಏರ್ಪಡಿಸಿದರು. ಚಿತ್ರದುರ್ಗದ ಇತಿಹಾಸದಲ್ಲಿ ಅವೆಲ್ಲ ಮೈಲಿಗಲ್ಲುಗಳು ಅಂತ ಅನ್ನಿಸ್ಕೊಂಡವು. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ತಿಲಕ ಸಂಘವನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ಕಟ್ಟಿ ಬೆಳೆಸಿದರು ಚಿತ್ರದುರ್ಗದಲ್ಲಿ. ಅದರ ಆಶ್ರಯದಲ್ಲಿ ವಾಚನಾಲಯ, ಗ್ರಂಥ ಭಂಡಾರ, ಚರ್ಚಾಕೂಟ, ವಿಚಾರಗೋಷ್ಠಿ, ಭಗವದ್ಗೀತಾಧ್ಯಯನ ತರಗತಿಗಳು, ಗಣೇಶೋತ್ಸವ ಇಂಥ 4 ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮಗಳನ್ನು ನಡೆಸಿದರು. ಸ್ವದೇಶಿ ಮತ್ತು ಖಾದಿ ಪ್ರಚಾರಕರಾದರು. 10 ತರುಣರಿಗೆ ಖಾದಿ ದೀಕ್ಷೆಯನ್ನು ಕೊಟ್ಟರು. ಹೀಗೆ ಚಿತ್ರದುರ್ಗ ಜಿಲ್ಲೆಯ ತರುಣರು ಸ್ವಾತಂತ್ರ್ಯ ಸಂಗ್ರಾಮದಲ್ಲಿ ಪಾಲ್ಗೊಳ್ಳೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಅಡಿಪಾಯ ಹಾಕಿದವರು ಹರಿಹರ ಗುಂಡೂರಾಯರು. ಇಳಿವಯಸ್ಸಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಅಧ್ಯಾತ್ಮದ ಕಡೆ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಒಲವು ಬಂತು. ಅಧ್ಯಯನದ ಹಾಗೂ ಅನುಭವದ ಆಧಾರದ ಮೇಲೆ ಗೀತೋಕ್ತ ಕರ್ಮಯೋಗ, ದಕ್ಷಿಣಾಮೂರ್ತಿ ಸ್ತೋತ್ರ, ಪರಮಾತ್ಮ ಇದ್ದಾನೆ, ವೀರ ವಿಶ್ವಾಮಿತ್ರ ಹೀಗೆ ಹಲವಾರು ಪುಸ್ತಕಗಳನ್ನು ಬರೆದರು. 1977ರಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರು ದಿವಂಗತರಾದರು. ಆ ಹಿರಿಯರ ಸ್ಮರಣೆಯನ್ನು ಊರ್ಜಿತವಾಗಿ ಇಡುವ ದೃಷ್ಟಿಯಿಂದ ಅವರ ಪುತ್ರರಾದ ಚಲನಚಿತ್ರದ ಹಾಗೂ ಕಿರುತೆರೆಯ ಗಣ್ಯ ನಟರಾದ ವಿಂಗ್ ಕಮಾಂಡರ್ H.G. ದತ್ತಾತ್ರೇಯ ನಮಗೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. H.G. ಸೋಮಶೇಖರ್ ರಾವ್ ಅವರ ಪರಿವಾರದವರು ಈ ದತ್ತಿಯನ್ನು ಏರ್ಪಡಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅದರಡಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ವರ್ಷದ ಈ ವಿಶೇಷೋಪನ್ಯಾಸ ನೀಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಬಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕ ಉಚ್ಚ ನ್ಯಾಯಾಲಯದ ನ್ಯಾಯಮೂರ್ತಿಗಳಾದ ಶ್ರೀ V. ಜಗನ್ನಾಥ್ ಅವರು. ಕಾನೂನು ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರದ ತಜ್ಞತೆ, ವಿಶಾಲ ಅನುಭವ ಪಡೆದುಕೊಂಡಿರೋದರ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ, ಸಾಹಿತ್ಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಗಾಢ ಆಸಕ್ತಿ ಬೆಳೆಸ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. DVG ಅವರ ಅಭಿಮಾನಿಗಳು ಕೂಡ ಆಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಸದಾ ಜನಹಿತ ಚಿಂತನೆ ಮಾಡುವವರು ಅಂತಲೂ ಹೆಸರಾಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ನಿರಂತರ ಅಧ್ಯಯನಶೀಲರು. ಒಂದು ದೃಷ್ಟಿಯಿಂದ ಜೀವನದ ಎಲ್ಲ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರಗಳಿಗೂ ಯಾವುದೋ ಒಂದು ಸ್ತರದಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರತ್ಯಕ್ಷವಾಗಿಯೋ ಪರೋಕ್ಷವಾಗಿಯೋ ಕಾನೂನಿನ ಸಂಬಂಧ ಬಂದೇ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ಈ ಸಂಜೆ ನ್ಯಾಯಮೂರ್ತಿ V. ಜಗನ್ನಾಥ್ ಅವರು ಲಿಟರೇಚರ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಲಾ ಈ ಸ್ವಾರಸ್ಯಕರ ವಿಷಯವನ್ನು ಕುರಿತು ಮಾತನಾಡೋರಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ತಮ್ಮ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸವನ್ನು ಆರಂಭ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ನ್ಯಾಯಮೂರ್ತಿ V. ಜಗನ್ನಾಥ್ ಅವರನ್ನು ಪ್ರಾರ್ಥನೆ ಮಾಡ್ತೇನೆ.
This is my first visit to this prestigious institution, Gokhale Institute of Public Affairs, and at the outset I am very happy to know that Sri S.R. Ramaswamy, Secretary of this institute, who just made a brief introduction about me was the contemporary of late D.V. Gundappa, and it was due to his efforts and toil that the great works of DBG were brought to light, and it was Sri S. R. Ramaswamy who took down everything that was said by DBG, and thus all of us are greatly indebted to Sri Ramaswamy for helping the late literary figure DBG to bring out such wonderful works, basically in Kannada. And I am also happy to note that Sri Ramaswamy not only was the contemporary of DBG, but he is also the editor of a very popular Kannada magazine, Uttana, for over 30 years. And while talking to him just for a cup of coffee, I came to know that he was also an editor, sub-editor, deputy editor in Deccan Herald for several years. So he has the 7 years each, what they call in the field of journalism, and it is really a very heartening to note that such a personality in Sri S. Ramaswamy is at the helm of affairs of this great institute as secretary, and his humility and his humbleness can be seen not only from the way he just introduced the speaker as well as referred to the today's endowment lecture, and in whose name it is today being organized here. And apart from that, he himself has written a number of books, and he also gave me today a few of the books which I am sure will be a very delightful reading for me. And I therefore at the outset thank Sri S. R. Ramaswamy, Secretary of this institute, for giving me this opportunity to come and share some thoughts with the enlightened audience who are gathered here. And it was Mr. Krishnamurthy, the Joint Secretary, who met me some time back through my, what shall I say, my classmate in post-graduation in law, Mr. Chandrasekhar, an advocate who is also present in this hall. It was through Mr. Chandrasekhar that I was introduced to this magnificent institute, and I remember all these persons, and with these two introductory words, and I also would like to say that it is a matter of coincidence that today's lecture is being organized in memory of late Harihara Gundu. I happen to meet his illustrious son, Wing Commander H.G. Dattatreya, few minutes back, and he was in the Air Force for 20 years, then he was also in HAL Management Academy for several years, and apart from holding such a post of distinction, and we just heard from Sri Ramaswamy also that Wing Commander H.G. Dattatreya is also a very popular actor, both in the TV and other medias, and his brother Sobhasekhar, both of them organized this endowment lecture in memory of their father. And of course, as the two sons are very well known, so also was their father. And we heard from our secretary that their father was also a freedom fighter and also a lawyer. So it is a matter of great delight that I am called upon to give a talk on literature and law, which is organized in memory of late father of Sri H.G. Dattatreya and his brother Somsekhar. And since he happened to be a lawyer, I think it is in fitness of things that a lawyer, a law and judge all must converge in this auditorium. And today it is really very rare coincidence that these things have happened today. Now with these few introductory words, let me come to the topic for today's discussion or address. Now, I have chosen the topic literature and law. Probably the audience sitting here might be wondering, so why this judge chose this particular topic of literature and law? What is the link, what is the connection the two have in common? Why should a judge speak on literature? He is only concerned with the law and legal rules. Just now we heard from secretary also that law affects our life one way or the other, right from the cradle up to the grave. So why should a judge bother about literature? Or for that matter, anybody, why should people have a peep into literature? What is the reason? And what is the excuse that I have to offer for choosing this subject? Although this takes me to the very object of this Gokhale Institute of Public Affairs. I see from the brochure that was given to me that among the several objects, one such one is to kindle the spirit of inquiry in the people, or to educate the people, to enable them to study the facts in all its aspects, in the constructive attitude that cares more for the positive practical good than theoretical perfection, and what is worthy of cultivation as a guide of life. Therefore, I have chosen this topic of literature and law, and I thought the second reason that prompted me to talk on this subject is after going through the brochure that was given to me and the talks just were delivered by very eminent speakers in this beautiful hall, I could not find a topic on literature and law. Therefore, I thought it is very pertinent to also speak about literature and law, which is a very interesting subject. And thirdly, and according to me, the most important reason for choosing this topic is because of the very founder of this great institute, namely late D.V. Gundappa, himself was a literary giant. We all know what his works are and how these books are revered by people all over the country. Probably Mankutirma Kagga of DVG can be, I think, put on par with any great classics of any world literature. Not only that, even his commentary on Bhagavad Gita, Jivana Dharma Yoga, which I had an occasion to read when I was very young, gives us a very wonderful and practical picture of Gita itself, how one should lead life by following the message given in Gita. Apart from this, there have been very beautiful works written by DVG, like Omarada Usuge, or say even small pamphlets like Baligondu Nambike, like that. There are so many good works of DVG which have inspired people in the past, which have inspired me, which continues to inspire the younger generation even in future. Therefore, I thought in fitness of things, let us talk literature and law, so that it will make this lecture meaningful, as DVG himself was a great literary figure. Now, having just shared my thoughts as to why I chose this topic, it is now proper for us to go into the subject of today's discussion, law, literature and law. Now, the study of law, when it is undertaken through literature, inevitably leads us to a whole world of learning. Rather, I would say, we will be exposed to the whole world of entire human nature itself. By studying literature, we will get a peep into the entire human nature, how the human nature reacts in a particular situations, what are all the problems that people come across in life. So these are all very important aspects of a man's sojourn in this world, which nobody can forget. So this is therefore it is very necessary that we also have to read literature. Not only lawyers and judges but even a layman, I would say, even a general person, public, should get a peep into literature. What it is going to do to him, we will presently know. Before I go to the impact of literature on law, let me tell you what is law. Only briefly, since we have gathering of a very enlightened audience here, and I don't want to say anything about law in our legal terms, so that it may look rather very dry and drab. But let me put it in a very simple sentence. Law is a system of rules governing the conduct of people and members of society and their reciprocal rights and duties. In other words, law, rather the rules, they enable the people in society to conduct themselves in such a way that there is peace in society, there is harmony in society, there is tranquility in society, and therefore this is what law means in a very simple term. Apart from this, the study of law touches and surrounds the entire human nature, and the study of history, politics, religion, social reforms, philosophy, and all these subjects, they take us into the very human world itself in all its color and glory. Now, just as the air that we breathe, without feeling its weight, envelops the entire earth and all those who dwell upon the earth. In similar way, law also envelops us at every stage of our career in this mundane world. Therefore, law can look at something which cannot be divested from us. Whether you go on the road riding a bicycle, or whether we put up a house, or perform a marriage, or write a will, or buy a property, do what you want, there is law in everything. Law operates at every sphere. Therefore, law is something which is a system of rules which enables us to live in peace in society. And society without any order can only be thought of in olden days, where the jungle laws were there. Every man was for himself and not for others. But with the advent of democracy, when the legal systems came into the picture, these rules of law has enabled people to live together and live in harmony. I remember one great American jurist, I think it was Daniel Webster, who said, justice is the ligament which binds the society together. Justice holds all people together so that people can live in peace and harmony. Therefore, this is the importance of law, and we cannot say that we are not influenced by law at any stage of our life. Having said what is law in very short manner, let us look to literature. What is literature? Literature in any form, be it novel, poetry, or a play, essays, biographies, autobiographies, is the mirror in which we see the working of human nature. Every writer, every essayist, every philosopher, through his books, gives us a mirror. In that mirror, what is reflected is the entire human nature. That is what literature is. And literature is also the canvas upon which, through words, we paint. Rather, the writers, they paint the interplay of human emotions, the values of society at a particular point of human history. If we want to know, we will have to go back to the literature. Reading literature, we will know what were the social values prevalent at a particular time, how were the people exploited. All this we come to know only by reading literature. Not only that, the virtues and vices of human beings, the good and evil nature of human beings, all these are reflected in the mirror of this literature. I think probably many of you must be aware of a very famous work of R.L. Stevenson, Jekyll and Hyde. The very same person, a single individual, reveals two sides of his character, one as Jekyll, other as the Hyde. There are people in this world who have got the dual nature. So life itself is reflected in literature. So if you want to know what is life, if you want to know what is human nature, go back to literature. Read any great work of any great author, you will get a wonderful picture of a life itself. Now, as I said, justice is very dear to one's heart. I refer to Daniel Webster. So also is literature. Every great writer of the past and even in the present, they have got the ability to convey great emotions through their writings. There have been great literary works which once you start reading, tears will flow from your eyes. But the impact which the literary figures had, I now recall at this juncture that I remember having read so many great novels of a great Kannada writer, Tara Subbarayaru, called Tara Su. I still remember the author's name and remember the books also, like Kambaniya Koilo, something like that. Read those works without knowing yourself, tears will flow from your eyes. That is the power of the writers. That's how they used to have command over the words or they express the happenings in and around them. Maybe sometimes their own experience is reflected in the works in the form of some other characters or some other figure. Probably all of us know that one of the greatest writers ever to born under the sun and the greatest writer of English language is none other than William Shakespeare. Why is Shakespeare held such high esteem even to this day? So he was born somewhere in 1562 or so. Why do people remember him? Why do people remember John Milton? What is the effect of their writing? Now it is said that Shakespeare in his entire work, all the plays, all the poems, all the sonnets that he wrote, in the entire literary work of Shakespeare comprised of about 15,000 words. In our general talk day to day, we hardly use 2 or 3,000 words. For everything we use the same word, beauty. Everything is said is beauty. There is no other word for us. We don't go beyond that. We don't expand our vocabulary at all. So Shakespeare, such a great writer, had used only 15,000 words in his entire work. Another great British writer, John Milton, did not use more than 8,000 words, whether it is Paradise Lost or Paradise Regained or any other work of Milton. Only 8,000 words were used in the entire work by John Milton. But what were the effect of those words? How did these writers convey their creativity and with what power? This is what is said about these two great authors by an eminent person. They say, take out a book of Shakespeare or Milton, cut the words, they will start bleeding. Meaning thereby, even today, those words carry life. Read Merchant of Venice of Shakespeare, read any other work, King Lear or Hamlet or anything else, read them, look at the power of it, how it impacts the reader. Every word of Shakespeare and Milton, they are alive today and they will bleed if it is cut with a knife. This was the power of literature. Henry Fielding, the author of Tom Jones, he says about this, the author who will make you weep by quoting Horace says, must first weep himself. If I want to make you weep, I must weep first. The emotion must swell in my heart. Only then I can convey my feelings to the reader. Therefore, the author himself must weep first. In reality, no person can paint a distress or agony well without feeling the distress and agony in himself. That is the power of literature. I am told in France there is a very beautiful sculpture which is preserved even to this day, which was sculpted some several 100 years ago by a very famous sculptor. He was a poor man, but he was involved in the art of creating a beautiful sculpture out of mud, stone, all these things. He created a beautiful sculpture, and it was getting late in the evening. Suddenly there appeared a cloud on the screen, and he feared that shortly it may rain. Therefore, he thought, let me preserve my work of art, let me preserve this sculpture for the future generation to enjoy and to emulate. So suddenly thought came to his mind, now rain is coming down heavily, what shall I do? He was wearing only one big long coat. He removed his coat, put it on that sculpture, covered it. Whole night he sat before the sculpture, what he had with his own fingers brought out. It was so chilling, it was so frozen atmosphere that next day morning the sculpture which he had created was found perfectly in good condition, but the man had died. But even today it is there. By so the great artists, writers and poets, they put their whole and soul into their work. Even for that matter, even if you take it acting also, there are some who put their entire life into acting. I remember at this juncture, I have read in Reader's Digest a very inspiring article. A great producer of Warner Brothers of America went to a village side in search of an actor to play a small role in a drama, because the drama was to be enacted in that particular village, and one of the key actors, rather one of the actors could not come on that day. So somebody has to be brought to fill that gap. Therefore this director went in search of somebody, and he found a very bulky man, looking like a boxer. And he told him, oh, I got a small role to give it to you. Will you come and do that role in our play? Because people are going to come and we don't want the drama to be cancelled or people to go back disappointed. This man agreed, yes, I'll come, I'll do whatever role you give me. But you must give me some amount, so many dollars you must give. The director agreed. Then this man went to the theatre, that theatre where the play is going to be enacted. The director told him, your role is very limited one. What you will have to do, you will have to hold the hand of the hero in that play, and both of you will have to bring it down. Whoever brings the hand of the other first will be the winner. But since you are going to be the villain, not the hero there, you will have to yield to the hero's bringing down your elbow. The man said, okay, I'll do it. There is no talk, no speech by this person, nothing of that sort. Just simply do this small act. We went there, that particular scene came, he sat on the table with the hero there, both of them held their hands, fisted together. Then naturally the hero ultimately won, because this man's elbow came down the table first. Then his role was over. It so happened on the day, another great director of America, very famous producer and director, he happened to visit that particular village. And as I was having some free time, he just went and sat there and watched the play. At the end of the play, this director went and met the local director who had acted the play. Tell me who that man who just played the role of getting defeated in that fight, what is his name and why? And the director asked him, why do you want to know about that particular man? He is a local man, he just came there. Then he said, this producer said, no, I saw the entire play today. Of all the persons who had played a part in this play, I found this man's role very inspiring. He was full of emotions. He had involved himself body and soul, so I want that man. Then he picked him up. Later on, that fat man became one of the famous actors of American motion picture. Why I say all this is because the writers, literary figures, they involve themselves so much they give everything to the others. It is said by about Charles Dickens, to whom I am going to refer to a little later on, that when Charles Dickens was writing a particular character in his novels, he used to go to a room, shut himself there, write about that particular character. If he is a villain or a murderer, he will have to write everything about that murderer. In one such play, he was to write about a life of a murderer, everything. He wrote it. He sat for about 15 days in that room. At the end of that period, Dickens came out of the room. He was looking like a murderer. That shows the involvement of the great writers in the works of literature. That is why it is said one should read literature so that one will know what life is. Now it is said every good work of literature requires a human aim. What is that aim? To cheer a person, to console a person, to pacify a person, or to ennoble the life of the people. It is by good work alone that men of letters can justify their place in the world. This is all what I want to say in this brief time about what literature is, what it can make, how it can help us. Now, if study of law makes us well versed in the legal rules, if I know what the law is, if you know what the law is, you will organize your life in such a way, you will not commit any mistakes, you will not violate any of the laws. We are safe. This is one aspect of lawyer. It makes a person knowledgeable in law. He knows what the law is. What about study of literature? What does it do? What is the purpose of literature? Literature, apart from giving delight to the reader, let me quote another great literary figure of England, Francis Bacon. He said, literature, it gives him delight to the reader. It serves as an ornament in discourse. I am giving a discourse. I am making use of literary figures, literaries. I am quoting from literature. It gives ornament to a discourse. And it gives the ability to handle the complex business of life, how to handle the practicalities of life. Literature gives us the ability as to how to handle such situations. To continue to quote the great Francis Bacon, this is what he said. I am sure many of you must be aware of this because I find there are many literary giants sitting in this hall, including Mr. Ramaswamy and others. Bacon said, study of history makes one wise. Read the history of Herodotus, it makes one very wise. Like we say, read Mahabharata, you will know what life is. What is not there in Mahabharata is not there anywhere in the world. Like that. So study of history makes one very wise. Study of logic and rhetoric makes one able to contend, able to argue, able to develop analytical reasoning. And therefore, study of literature can be of great use. Not only that, every defect of the mind may find a special treatment in study of literature. If you want to know this impact of this sentence, every defect of the human mind may find a special treatment in study of literature. If we want to know what is the experience of a psychic person, how does he feel, how does he go about in life, we will have to go back to our Kannada writer, Triveni, under books. We can find entire Nimbus itself open before the audience, how she gives picture of all those people, whether it is Bekkina Kannu or any other book of Triveni, we can get a picture of that. How the defects in the human beings are taken into the literary work by the author and how they give a treatment to it. Study of literature helps one in perfecting one's nature. Study the literature, it helps us to perfect our nature. I don't want to say it. Other day I saw in the paper that one of the journalist wife of a very famous actor in Bombay revealed a certain aspect of her husband's life. It happened that the husband, being a film actor, he told his wife about some of his mistakes he had committed in the past. But he never anticipated that one day his wife will say it in public about this trait of his. Very recently, the wife wrote a book, autobiography, rather biography of her husband, actor, and there she revealed certain failings of this great actor. Why I say this is how literature, enables us to know what the defects are there in human reason, in human faculties. Probably those who have read great British writer, I think Thomas Hardy, will agree with me that one of the very powerful novels which he wrote, apart from Mayor of Casterbridge, was Tests of the D'Urbervilles. What happens when a girl tells her husband what had happened to her in the past life? In that novel, Tess reveals to her husband that she was raped by a person some time back. Husband leaves her. She is left alone to fight for her life. Then the story goes on. So how by reading all these things we will know that literature enables one to perfect his nature, and in turn literature is perfected by experience gained from nature. Literature is perfected by the experience which one gains from nature. So these are all the great importance of literature, and many great personalities who have worked on this planet have attributed their success in life and achievements to great literary works. We can remember, I think Mahatma Gandhi was greatly influenced by the work of Ruskin Bond. I remember it is Unto the Last, John Ruskin. That book influenced him very greatly. And we are sure that all of us who are here in this hall must have been influenced by some literary work in some way or other in our life. Now, having said about literature, let me go a little deeper into it. The social conditions of a particular time is reflected in literature in its various forms. Thus, we find society is the common base both for literature as well as for law. Law operates in society, and society picture is given to us by literature through literary works of great authors. Human nature is revealed to us by literary works of great authors. Therefore, there is a connection between law and literature. Both are very important. Now, if you look at the great literary works of the past, particularly if you go to the English literature, you find that many great authors themselves have studied law, whether it is Sir Walter Scott, or whether it is Edward Coke, or even Francis Bacon. Many of them that studied law at some point of time. Maybe some of them were lawyers, some became judges, but some who only had a stint in the legal field, like Charles Dickens. He was not a lawyer by profession, but he worked in a court. He took down everything that happened in a particular court, Charles Dickens. Therefore, the importance of law can be seen even in the works of these literary figures. Why should a person, let us say a lawyer or a judge or anyone for that matter, why we should be familiar with the literature? What is the need for it? Now, in the first place, there are several episodes of facts and types of character in the professional life whose descriptions by the famous novelist have become classic in literature. We meet several persons in our life Suddenly we remember this person looks like that literary figure in that particular work. I don't know whether anybody here, apart from those who got literary states, had occasion to study in their school or in college days, David Copperfield. You can remember the character of Micawber, remember the villain character of Mr. Uriah Heep. We find such people even in the world today also. There are people of such characters and traits. Therefore, literature gives us exposure to all these kinds of people. Whether it is Sergeant Bosphorus in Pickwick Papers, I will talk to you about Pickwick Papers a little later on. The Chancery suit in Bleak House, Effie Dean's trial in Heart of Midlothian, the role of Portia in Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice. All these figures have become immortal in literary world. They have been made immortal by the very authors themselves. Though the authors have died and gone, these literary figures continue to exist. For example, like Pickwick, nobody can perfect Pickwick and his role. Therefore, this is the importance of literature here. If somebody wants to know what was the police system, how was the police justice administered in England, one should go and read Dickens' novel Oliver Twist. There you get the life of the police justice system in England at the relevant time. If somebody wants to develop thinking analytically, trying to deduce, trying to draw the inference from certain facts, arrive at a conclusion, the course open to them is to go and read the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I think people must be knowing that he was the author of a great Sherlock Holmes series, Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. Anyone who reads Sherlock Holmes stories will develop the art of thinking analytically, will develop the power of deduction, apart from mastery over the language itself. And narration of facts, how do you put the facts, how do you explain to them? Where do you get all these qualities? These are all found in great literary figures. If somebody wants to know what happens if an innocent man is put behind bar, if an innocent person is tried for an offense, what happens? How does he feel? How the system of law is seen by the people? The best part, the best way to know all this is to go and read a famous book by Frank Kafka called The Trial. Trial is a story of an innocent man who was brought to gallows. I can also tell you at this juncture another great work of Dostoevsky, who Brother Karamazov is one of the wonderful novels where you find a very beautiful argument addressed before the court on behalf of the defense. Anybody who wants to take the career in law, anybody who wants to become particularly a criminal lawyer must read the works of Dostoevsky, whether Crime and Punishment or this Brother Karamazov. They will get such an experience of the life and the way they can put it across to the judge, the viewpoint from their client's angle. Therefore, to put it in a nutshell, literature, especially the novel, is nothing but a catalogue of life's characters. If you want to know life's characters, you want to get a catalogue. I got a catalogue here of great speakers who came and spoke on this occasion. Like that, if you want to have a catalogue of life's characters, and if you want to know the human nature, go to literature. There you get it, all these things. In other words, a person, be it a lawyer, a judge, or even a labor, he has to deal in life with various types of people. But one life is not enough for us to have the personal experience of how people are going to behave, how they will behave. One life is not sufficient. So what is the remedy? Go to the world of fiction, go to the world of literature. We will know the behavior of people, how they behave in a particular junction of their life. You will get it from reading those works. Not necessary for us to have our own experience of these things. Therefore, to learn this, one must go to fiction. Fiction is nothing but it is a gathering of life's portrait. We have got here great personalities, portraits being put in this beautiful hall. By looking at them, we can go back to their period, how they lived, their experience. Likewise, literature or the novel or the fiction for that matter is nothing but a gallery of life's portraits. We can see in that. So this is all how I would like to convey my thoughts about what literature is. Now, having said about law and literature, let us go and see how the literary figures have expressed their views on men and matters, or even particular, for example, law itself. What do they say about law? We know what the law is, number of books are there, our judgments are there, people will read it. But how the literary figures looked at law, what was their understanding of law, how they viewed law from what angle? I want you to give look at some of the great authors. I have only chosen just 4 or 5 of them, but I will only touch very briefly about those authors, so that we will be able to appreciate how literature and law are interconnected. I am also aware of the time in which I will have to conclude my topic as also. Now, I said about Shakespeare, I said about the power of his words and how his words continue to have life even to this day. Now, we all know the famous play Merchant of Venice, where Portia goes as a lawyer in disguise to the court of the Duke. She goes there, and the facts briefly put are: one by name Shylock enters into some kind of lending of money to one Antonio. Shylock gives money to Antonio. Shylock gives money to one, it was Mr. Bassanio. 3,000 ducats are taken by him. And Shylock wants some kind of a guarantee for the money that he has lent to Bassanio. For that, a close friend of Bassanio by name Antonio, he comes there. He says, I will be surety for this transaction. And Shylock says to that Antonio, all right, this is the amount which you will have to repay. You have to execute a bond. Within 3 months, you will have to pay back this amount which I am lending it to Bassanio. But if you fail to pay back this money, I want equal weight of your flesh in respect of the money that I have given to you, I have given to Bassanio. The deal is struck, both of them agree for this. Later on, Antonio is unable to keep up the promise. He could not give the bond amount to Shylock within the specified time. Matter goes to the court, Duke's court, matter goes there. Shylock says, I want this pound of flesh of Antonio equal to the amount that I have lent to Bassanio. Now, there, this lady, Portia, goes there, disguising as a lawyer, doctor of laws. Then she puts certain questions to Shylock. I will only read to you just 2 or 3 sentences from Shakespeare to tell you the power of literature and how Shakespeare brings laws into literary field there. Portia, I am only cutting short the big narration here. Portia tells him, all right, you have to get back the pound of flesh equal to the amount that you have given to Bassanio. All right, come on, bring the surgeon, bring the knife. The condition was that Antonio must give the flesh from the part which is close to his heart, close to the heart. From that portion, the flesh has to be removed and given to Shylock. Then she tells him, this is what Portia says, prepare yourself to cut off the flesh. I am only putting the words of Shakespeare here. She tells Shylock this, Shylock, shed no blood, nor cut less or more, but just a pound of flesh. If that is what you want, don't ask more, and don't ask less than just a pound, be it but so much as makes it light or heavy in substance. One or if you even cut a bit of flesh, she says, but even if it is smallest in the estimation of a hair, you will die. She tells Shylock, and then the Shylock says to her, what is the condition which you are now telling me? You say don't cut more, don't cut less. You say don't allow the blood to fall down. Where are these conditions in the bond? Portia says to her, look at your bond, what we have said, a pound of flesh. We are not said about blood, we are not said about less or more, only a pound of flesh. Then she tells him that take only a pound of flesh. Then later on, Shylock feels, yes, I am now done to death, because I cannot take only a flesh, a pound of flesh. Obviously, blood will come, little more or little less will be there. So he knows that he will lose the case here. Then he says, kindly show mercy on me. Kindly show mercy on me. Then this is what Portia says when he asks for mercy. She says like this, and the offender's life lies in mercy of the Duke only against all other wives, in which predicament I say unto you that directly or indirectly you have contrived against the very life of the defendant, that has incurred you in further danger of life imprisonment. You will die, she told Shylock. Then she says regarding the pardon, this is what she says here. You did not show mercy when Antonio pleaded before you that I am going to give you double the amount which I should for surety. You refused it. You refused to show mercy even in the presence of the Duke. But now you want mercy to be shown to you. We will not show to you. No mercy for you. Only the Duke alone can give you mercy, but nobody else. I say this because not only for the effect of the words of Shakespeare on literature. For example, take any particular case. Somebody goes to a court of law, asks for some relief. Generally we all say, a man who goes to court of law must go with clean hands. He should not be a person who has committed some mistakes. You have to be very clean hands. Then only you will get relief from the court. If you want to get some relief, you also must show by your conduct how you have lived up to. Like that. Only one small example I gave you to say about Shakespeare, but there are so many great plays of Shakespeare, and we all know the famous quotation of Hamlet, which we all generally use in our day-to-day dealings also. Whenever we are in a fix, we remember Hamlet, to be or not to be. Where do you get this? Only from Shakespeare. So I can go on telling more about Shakespeare. Probably I think you require one particular lecture itself only to know about the great works of Shakespeare himself, about human nature. Then let us go to another great writer of the past. This person, none other than Edward Coke. Edward Coke, he was a lawyer, he was a philosopher, He was called as the oracle and ornament of common law. He was a lawyer of prodigious learning. He was known for untiring industry, singular acumen, and he had the accurate knowledge of the human nature. If you read Koch, you will get the accurate knowledge of human nature. I will give you some quotations of Koch to drive home this point a little later. He was a judge of a perfect purity, independent statesman, and a man of upright life. His writing have had more influence upon the law of England than any other writer of his times. Now, this Koch had the ability to convey in such powerful words aspects of life. What is justice? What is law? You look at Koch's definition, how he puts it, it makes one immediately react, yes, what he says is very right. How does he get this power? Where did Koch got this power of such a profound expression? I will take you to what was said of Edward Koch by Lord Campbell, who wrote the Lives of Chief Justice of England. There we find that Koch was familiar with the classical literature of both prose and poetry. He had mastered the language of Latin. In those days, anybody who knew Latin was held in high esteem. Like in olden days, anybody who had learned Sanskrit was highly revered and held in high esteem. So Latin was something like that. Every person of good education was supposed to know Latin in those days. Koch had mastered Latin. And if you read the works of Edward Koch, you will find he refers to so many quotations of great authors of the past. He refers to Virgil, Cicero, Aristotle, Seneca, Cato, and many great authors. He copiously quotes in his works these authors. So look at how literature influences law. Now the impact of this high learning of Koch can be felt in the following quotations of Koch himself. Now this is what Koch says. Now we all know that we cannot know what the law of the country is today. How many laws are there in the country? How many acts of parliaments are there? Nobody can tell. Even I as a judge cannot tell how many acts are there. We only deal with the cases where particular act is involved. How many laws are there? How many acts are there? Every day so many laws are being made by parliament and state legislature. For that Koch says, no man can carry the words of the positive law of the parliament in his head. We cannot carry in our head. Meaning thereby it is impossible for us to know what the law is. Though it is an irony that no man can be given the defense of saying, I am ignorant of law. Ignorance of law is no excuse. I go to Paris, I drive my car there on the left side, I will be caught. Because the rule is you drive only on the right side, unlike our country. So no excuse. Therefore, then this is what he says here. Another example of Koch. There is no greater injustice than when under the color of justice we do somebody some injury. Otherwise, there is no greater injustice than when under the color of justice injury is done to somebody. Look at how Koch puts justice and injustice. Then he says, this is very interesting here. Sometimes when the public good is pretended, private benefit is intended. So whenever we speak of some public good, I may have my own private interest at the back of my mind. Meaning thereby, that's what it says. Sometimes when public good is pretended, a private benefit is intended. Then this is what it says. The law is the rule, but law is silent. Who will tell us what the law is? He says, the law is the rule, but it is mute. It cannot speak. The judges are the speaking law. What I say in the court, that is law. That's what Justice Holmes has said. We want to know what the law is, go to the court, pay what judges do. That is what law is. Then, we all know in our legal education, would people who have studied, even in common man also may be aware of it, if he is a well-read person, that corporations or companies are different from the individual persons who work there. Examples, the directors of a company. Though the directors are there in a company, company is an independent body. It has got a separate legal entity of its own, separate from the directors of the company. That's what we say. Anybody studying company law will know that company is different from its directors. Now, how to put it in literary language, how to make it very, very clear, even to a layman who knows a bit of literature, Edward Coke says like this: corporations have no soul. Atma illa anta. Meaning thereby corporation, company is there. There are people, directors, but they are separate. They are separate. Very famous case in company law on this is Solomon versus Solomon. Solomon and his wife and children, they become director of a company. When a matter goes to court, who should be held responsible, who should be liable? Solomon's case, it was held. Solomon's family members, though they are directors of company, company is different from the members. So company has got its own identity. They are separate. But look at it from the literary angle, it has got no soul at all. That's what Coke says. Then another very interesting quotation from Edward Coke. He says, a right cannot die. If I have a right, that right cannot die. Trodden down it may be, but never trodden out. You may stamp it, you may stamp on my right, but you cannot take it out. Right continues to be there in the person there. Then he says there are three types of people, or there are three kinds of people who can be called as very unhappy people. Who are those three kinds of unhappy people? Who are those unhappy men or women? This is what Coke says. He who has got the knowledge but does not teach it to others, he is an unhappy man. He who has got knowledge but does not teach it to others is an unhappy man. Number two, he who teaches but does not live after what he teaches. ಅಂದರೆ ಹೇಳೋದೊಂದು ಮಾಡೋದೊಂದು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಲ್ಲ ಹಾಗೆ. He that teaches but does not live after what he teaches is also an unhappy man. Third is he who does not know anything and does not bother also to know anything. He is also an unhappy man. Then regarding the practice of and the study of law, this is what Edward Coke has said. He says, no man can be a complete lawyer by only studying in the law college, going to university, getting the university knowledge. You will not become a complete lawyer without experience in practical cases. Nor experience or without knowledge is of any use. So neither experience alone nor knowledge alone is sufficient for anyone, but he must be both speculative and also active. Why I say this quotation is because there are people who got such a tremendous theoretical knowledge of a subject, but they lack experience in life. I will only take a permission to digress a little away from literature and law to drive home this point. A young man who wanted to study astrology, who wanted to become expert in astrology, went to a great master. The great master of astrology, he taught him all the rules of astrology. He taught him everything that was there in Brihat Jataka, Vara, Mihira, and so many other great authors of astrology works. He told him. Then he told the young man, yes, your study is complete, you can go. Then this man came out of the school or where the learning place and put up a board. Astrologer, so much of knowledge I have acquired, so many things, yes, I got it. Then one day, somebody went to his house. See, there's a small problem. Kindly come along with me to a hospital. I want to see a small child. You take him to the hospital. This young astrologer, he is taken to the hospital there. In the hospital, a child is shown, a small child, baby of maybe 3 or 4 months, whatever it is. The fist of the baby was found closed. It was like this, only one fist. Then the man told him, this astrologer, say, this is our daughter's child. Look at the fist, it is closed. All the efforts made by us has ended in failure. We were unable to make that fist look like normal. I want you to tell us from your knowledge of astrology what is there in the palm of the child. Now it is said, those who study astrology, those who got some acquaintance with astrology, or those who watch TV also on that, we will know that there is one kind of astrology where the answer is given depending upon the question that is put to the astrologer and the time at which the question is put. The astrologer notes the time at which the question is put. Then based on particular time, he draws a chart. Then from that he tells the man what will happen to him, what is the answer to his question. This young man who had mastered the theory of astrology under the great master immediately took a sheet of paper, looked at the watch, then wrote down a chart, which place, what is the latitude, altitude, what time the sun rose on that day, everything, a chart was ready. Then after that he started reading the chart, the planetary positions, what is the effect of that, all these things he did with the experience of that knowledge he had gained there. Theoretically, he arrived at the conclusion that this small baby has got in its hand an object which is round in shape with a hole in it. That was the inference he drew from his calculation. He was very right. He was perfectly right in arriving at the conclusion that the baby has got an object which is round in shape with a hole in it. Having drawn the conclusion, now he must tell the person what it has got. Immediately he said, the child has got a grinding stone. You know, ರಾಗಿ ಬೀಸೋದು ಕಲ್ಲು ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಹಿಟ್ಟು ಇವಾಗೆಲ್ಲ ಮಿಕ್ಸಿಗೆ ಬಂದುಬಿಟ್ಟಿದೆ, ಆವಾಗಿತ್ತಲ್ಲ ಕಲ್ಲು, ಹೇಗಿದೆ ಅದು? ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ರೌಂಡ್ ಇನ್ ಶೇಪ್, ದಟ್ ಬಿಗ್ ಸ್ಟೋನ್ ವಿತ್ ಎ ಹೋಲ್ ಇನ್ ದಿ ಸೆಂಟರ್. Now this is called lack of experience in life. He had knowledge but he lacked experience. That's why actually what the child was having in the hand was a small ring like this. Ring is also round with a hole. Hole means center is blank there. So he was unable to say from his inference the child has got a small ring in the hand. He was unable to comprehend that how can a small child can hold a big grinding stone. That did not occur to him. That is because of lack of experience. So mere knowledge is of no use. We all speak about knowledge is power. It is not correct. Knowledge is power only when you use it. When I don't use it, it remains dormant. It never gives us the power. Therefore, Koch says, no man can call himself completely as a lawyer only by knowing the knowledge from the university without experience. Here I would like to share with you what I heard when I came here from one of our official gentlemen here. He told me that the aim of this institute and the object behind DVG establishing this foundation was to spread education, to cater to the people. Real education in life starts only after our school education stops. And from that angle, this institute is doing very great service to humanity, which cannot be valued in terms of money or anything else. Now, this is all what I would like to say about Edward Coke. And let me now take you to Charles Dickens. Very briefly, I will tell you about Charles Dickens. This Charles Dickens had a very miserable life. He had the misfortune of seeing his own father put into prison because he was unable to pay the debts. Charles Dickens worked in a factory to paste the labels on some black bottles. That's how he worked there. He had nobody to guide him, and he had no words of encouragement given to him by anybody. Then, how did Dickens then wrote all these famous novels? Now, Dickens himself says in his work that I had no advice, I had no counsel, I had no encouragement, I had no consolation, I had no support from anybody. So, help me God. That was his attitude, his plight at that point of time. He wrote at the age of 23 a book called Sketches of Boz. Then came his very famous work, the Pickwick Papers. Pickwick Papers made Charles Dickens immortal in the world of literature. Nobody can think of Charles Dickens without Pickwick Papers, or think of Pickwick Papers without Charles Dickens. In Pickwick Papers, you find very amusing characters are there. What happens? A person fails to pay the debt. There was a law in England at that point of time where if a person fails to pay debt, he is put behind the bars until the amount is paid by him. Dickens describes all these things in his novels, number of novels. How did Dickens present human nature to the people? I said in the beginning of my talk that literature is nothing but it is a mirror of society itself. What kind of mirror was showed to all of us by Charles Dickens? Here is what he said. Dickens showed the humorous side of life. Life is mirrored in his pages. In his pages we find life is totally mirrored there. But what type of mirror was there? It was a mirror which was convex in shape. It was warped mirror, not of a usual ordinary normal size. He went on holding that mirror before everybody. He held the mirror before his father and came out the picture of Micawber. He held it to his mother and got the character of Mrs. Nickleby. Like that, he keep the mirror before so many people around his life and presents to us everything about the world that he had seen, everything that he had touched as a human person and a human being. Now, it is very interesting to know that Charles Dickens did not have any education as a lawyer, though he worked in court for some time taking down a dictation or some sort of it. But his knowledge was derived from what he saw and what he heard. That's how he got his knowledge. We also say one of the sources of our Hindu law is Shruti and Smriti, what was heard and what was remembered, something like that. Therefore, Dickens, through his works like Pickwick Papers, where you can see everything about the life of a debtor, Bleak House, where he presents what happens to a case in a court of law, how many years the case lingers in the court, what is the effect of delay on the person who goes to the court. These are pictured in Bleak House wonderfully by Dickens. In one of the novels, I think it is Hard Times. In Hard Times, through the characters how Dickens tells us about the legal system and the defect in the system. A person by name Stephen Blackpool, he goes to a lawyer by name Bonderby. Stephen Blackpool goes to the lawyer because he wants to stay away from his wife. His wife made life of Stephen Blackpool very miserable. His was a case of a lottery which was blank, in the sense that he was not happy with his wife. So he wanted to get away from his wife. So this Blackpool goes to the lawyer and tells him, please find me a remedy for this. Now see how Dickens has picturized legal system of that time in his work. The lawyer says, the character says to that person, it costs lot of money. A mint of money is required to give you this relief. First, you must go to the doctor's common with a suit. Doctor's commons means a court at the lowest level. You must go there and file a suit. And then you would have to go to the court of common law with another suit. Next stage, you would have to go to the House of Lords with one more suit. And then you will have to get an act of parliament enforced through parliament to enable you to marry again another lady. And all this will cost you 1,500 pounds or even more this. So by this example he shows how much time it takes in a court to get the relief. How in literature we find beautifully explained here. Then in Oliver Twist you find the life of a prisoner in a prison, how his life is led. You get a picture of that. If you read Bleak House, you get the beautiful picture of the delay in court, how delay occurs, how many days and years. There's a case of somebody taking care of a trust. Somebody was asked to take care of a trust. Estate was there. Some dispute arose. Matter went to court. The amount spent for litigation was gone increasing, and the estate was getting decreased. A time came, everything was lost in the estate. Only cost was going up. Only papers, nothing else. Nothing remained. This is how beautifully pictures the delay in court. Read that book of Dickens on this Bleak House. You get know as to what the system of law was there in England. And I will tell you, because of the work of Charles Dickens, where he pictured the difficulty of a person in a prison, a difficulty in going to the court in delay. In England, several laws were brought out, and they abolished the sentence of life imprisonment for a person who is kept in a prison but unable to pay the debt. The law itself was passed later. Such was the influence of Dickens even on the legal system of his times. Then let me move on to another author, Honoré de Balzac. Balzac is considered even today as equal to Dickens of England is to France. What was Charles Dickens to England or English literature? Balzac was to the French literature, and this Balzac had lived only for a short period of time. He hardly lived for about 58 years or so, not more than that. He was born in 1799 but died in 1850, hardly about 50 years. But he was also trained in law, but his ambition was to become a writer, and he became a writer. During the last 20 years of his life, this Balzac produced not one or two, 90 novels, 90 novels, 30 short stories and 5 plays. Before he started his work of literature, he had also prepared a beautiful synopsis called The Human Comedy. He wanted to say about 3,000 characters in his works. 3,000 persons what to be pictured in through his novels. That was his way of writing. He wrote so profusely. I think next only to Anthony Trollope of England, this author Balzac wrote too many novels of big size and length. He had mastered the Napoleon Code during his time, and in his novels we can find all reference to the Napoleon Code. It is said by studying the novels of Balzac, one can get the benefit of studying the comparative law and comparative morals. What one is required to know the comparative law? We don't have to study a book called Comparative Law, which we had in our post-graduation in law, which my friend Sansekhar also knows. You study the novels of Balzac, you will get the picture of the comparative law as well as comparative morals. This Balzac also wrote a very interestingly, and let me just refer to you just 2 or 3 quotations from Balzac. He says, the lawmaker should always be in advance of his age, because the lawmaker should go and study the local differences before he makes a law. He must be in advance of making a law. He says in one of the novels, Balzac, how to define a lawsuit. To what you can compare a lawsuit? What happens in a lawsuit? One party loses, one party wins, one party is not satisfied. Always. That is a picture of a lawsuit. Balzac gives a quotation like this: a lawsuit is like a marriage, because one party is always left dissatisfied. This is what he says very humorously about this. And what about a person who goes to a prison, serves a sentence, and comes out after the term is over? How does the people look at him? How he looks at the people? A criminal comes out of a jail. Balzac says that they are very suspicious of society. A person who comes out of the jail after the sentence is over, he is very suspicious of society. Society is also very suspicious of this person, and this leads to starvation or to repeat the crime once again. Then, regarding the criminal procedure that is applied in the courts, Balzac says, if the truth often looks like fiction in the court of law, in court of law, truth will almost very often looks like a fiction. But on the other hand, fiction often looks like truth. This is what he says. And then let me move on to next author, Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon, as we all know, was known for his literary power. His words carry so much of power, and he is incomparable in the world of literature. Francis Bacon, he was born in the year 1561. One other interesting point I want to tell all of you is three great literary persons in the world: Bacon, Edward Coke, and William Shakespeare. They were all born within a span of 10 years, from 1561 to 1552 to 1564. Within these 10 years, three giants, Edward Coke, Francis Bacon, and Shakespeare, they were born in England. So this Bacon, he was an Attorney General, he became the Lord Chancellor. He is a very famous writer, a philosopher, famous for his writing, but unfortunately he had a setback in his life, and he was ultimately found guilty of corruption, and he was removed from all the posts which he was holding as a parliamentarian, and his life became a tragedy in the end. But nevertheless, Bacon has contributed so much for literature that if you take the book of any book of Bacon, Advancement of Learning or Essays of Bacon, you will find every sentence is worth quoting. Every sentence is a quotable sentence in Francis Bacon's works. He put everything into his writings, whether history, poetry, essay, or natural philosophy. Everything he took it under his shoulders and wrote. He had such a penetrating power to make his words such an impact on the people that the mastery of his language was so great. But even today, if you read his works, you will be amazed at the way he put across his thoughts to the people. He used to adopt his style depending upon subject matter and purpose of his lecture. And he has been hailed as a great writer by other writers like P.B. Shelley, or Ruskin, or William Hazlitt, Dr. Johnson, or even Alexander Pope and others. Everything that Bacon produced was dedicated to his lifelong goal of improving the amount and quality of knowledge available to mankind. He wanted to improve the quality and the availability of knowledge to mankind so that it will help the people to alleviate their miseries in life. I can only say this, that Francis Bacon's literary works have got a profound impact on everybody, and even the legal field or law was not left out by Francis Bacon. Just one or two quotations from Bacon for your information. This is what he said about judges, lawyers, and judicature. He says, judges ought to be more learned than witty, more revered than plausible, more advised than confident. Above all things, integrity is their portion. How he describes a judge here. And then he says, how should a justice be delivered by a judge? In the cause of life and death, judges ought, as far as the law permits them, in justice to remember mercy and to cast a severe eye upon the example, but a merciful eye upon the person. Then about the advocates, this is what he says here. For advocates and counsels who plead in the court, he says they should have a lot of patience. Patience and gravity of hearing is an essential part of justice. If a judge talks too much in the court, lawyers will not like it. Judge will have to remain silent, allow the lawyers to speak, because it is said lawyers are paid only to speak and judges are paid only to listen. Therefore, he says he must have such amount of patience. Then he says the judge has got 4 important parts. One is regarding the evidence. Number 2, he must direct how evidence should go before him. He must moderate the length, the repetition of the argument, of the speech, and he should be able to recapitulate and select the material points of that which has been said to him, and then give the rule or the sentence. How beautifully Bacon speaks about law and judges, and finally he says, a judge where he sits. In those days, there was a very famous great wise judge by name Solomon. I think you all know it. Solomon was the wisest judge. Whenever a case came before him, he applied his common sense and used to give solutions. You must be knowing the famous example of a person coming to the court of Solomon and showing him 2 flowers. Which is the real flower, which is the artificial flower? How to say it? Today the artificial flowers look more than real flowers, and we all keep it in the house everywhere. Solomon immediately and tells that person, please take those 2 flowers and go near the window. Please stand there. The man goes, stands there with the 2 flowers in his hand. Open the window. Window is open. The bee comes, sits on the real flower. He says, you got the answer. That is the wisdom of Solomon. And Solomon, how he used to sit? He used to sit in a chair or a throne which had two lions, like our old days in Simhasanas, Maharajas, we can see lions, even some old pictures, we can see sitting on lions, all those things. What is the significance of those lions on both sides of the chair or the throne? Nobody knows the answer. We all see it every day. Here is what Bacon says about the importance of the lions on the throne. He says, judges should also remember that Solomon's throne was supported by lions. We judges should remember Solomon, how he sat and what was his chair. Supported by lions on both sides. Let them be lions. Let them be lions. Meaning thereby, let the judges be lions. But lions under the throne. Let judges be lions, but lions under the throne. We be lions under the throne. Meaning thereby, be circumspect. Be circumspect. You are a lion, but you are under the throne. Lions, be circumspect in everything that happens, that you do in the court. Let not judges also be ignorant of their own right as a principal part of their office. A wise use and application of laws. This is all a few examples of Lord Bacon I thought I should share with you. Then finally, I come to one last author, Arthur Ignatius Doyle. Arthur Ignatius Doyle. The middle word canon came to be added later on. He became Arthur Conan Doyle later on. Arthur Conan Doyle wrote a number of novels about adventures, various adventures. Read those novels, you will get to know how to analyze some situation. Supposing, let us say, I give my watch to one of you here. Will you be able to tell, by looking at the watch, my biography? We cannot. But by just looking at a watch of somebody, I cannot tell about the man. Or by looking at the hat which a person wears, can you say something about the man? We cannot. Read the books of Arthur Conan Doyle. He will know it. He is given a watch by his very famous friend, Dr. Watson. He gives a watch to Holmes, Sherlock Holmes, and tells him, please tell us about this person. Sherlock Holmes takes that watch into his hand, looks at it for about 3 or 4 minutes, keen observation. Then he starts telling about the quality of that person. By looking at the watch, he says, this person is from England, because the watch is made in England. This person is very careless, because the watch is found broken here and there at the edges. This person is not very meticulous, he is not disciplined, because so much of dust is gathered beneath the watch. Like this, he goes on telling the features of a man looking at the watch. Looking at the hat, he will say about the man. Where do you get this power of observation? Reading works of Arthur Conan Doyle. Let me just tell you, Conan Doyle wrote number of novels, number of books. One important, one interesting story which he wrote was the Last Special, LAST, Last Special. Means it is the last train. A train was to leave from London to Paris. The train left London. It has to go to Paris by evening. Evening, train did not reach Paris. So what happened to the train? That train was carrying on that particular day a very important person of the British Parliament. He was going in the train. Great person, very important person of the political regime. He was traveling in the train. So what happened to the train? People started inquiring about the train. As usual, like we do here, a commission was appointed. Somebody came. Some agency took up the task. Yes, we will try to find out what happened to the train. All of them went about all the places. Then finally they gave a report. conclusion given by the experts. They gave a report. They said, we are unable to trace the train. But according to us, three things must have happened. Three things must have happened. Number one, the train must have disappeared into the sky. You have to give the answer. And number two, the train must have gone down into the earth. Patala and Cheltivala. It has gone to the underground. Third is, the train must have been shattered into pieces that no piece is available. So this was the report they gave. You can't even find a small piece of train. Everything was shattered. This is the report. Then the matter is given to Sherlock Holmes, the famous detective agent. Sherlock Holmes takes up the case and goes to London, goes to Paris. Then from London, how many stations are there before going to Paris? He goes to each station, studies. First station, did the train come here? Yes. Like train from Bangalore to Delhi. Did it go to Arsikere? Yes. Did it go to some other place? Yes. Like that. This station? Yes. Second station? Yes, train had come. We gave signal, it went. Third station? It had come. Fourth station? Train did not reach. So there is understood, yes. The train came up to third station, did not go to the fourth. What happened? We started looking at the station at the third place, between third and fourth place, went on looking at the topography. Then he noticed that along with the regular track, there was another track which was laid some years ago. That track had gone little below the ground. Little below the ground, that track had gone. Sherlock Holmes ordered that place to be dug up. It was dug up. The story they were able to trace. They found the identical track had gone by the sideline under the ground. They went into the underground place. There they found there was a small track. The train was stationed there. It was damaged. This great person who travelled in the train, he was found dead. Then, this is the story of this last train. Now, coming to the message which I want to convey to you, or which Arthur Conan Doyle wants us to know from this example. He says, this is what he says. It is one of the elementary principles of practical reasoning. It is one of the elementary principles of practical reasoning that when the impossible has been eliminated, what remains or the residue, however improbable, must contain the truth. So, if we eliminate what is the impossible thing, what is the impossibility? What is the impossible thing here? Train cannot go into the air, impossible. Train cannot go to the bottom of the earth. Train cannot be cut into pieces as if no piece can be found. All these three hypotheses are impossible. So, rule out the impossibility. And what remains, though however improbable, must contain the truth. This is how it says. Let me tell you from my own experience as a judge. In a number of cases, I have quoted this particular sentence of Arthur Conan Doyle in my judgments, and they have been reported also. I have quoted this sentence. Sansekhar also knows how I often quote from literature to make a telling effect of what I wanted to convey. This is all about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Ladies and gentlemen, let me come to the last lap of my journey here. To conclude, the knowledge of law or the knowledge of literature, it is like a deep well. A deep well is there, out of which each man draws according to his strength of understanding. With a deep well, we draw according to the strength of our understanding the water that from the well. But we all know by experience that he who reaches the deepest part of the well is able to lift that bucket very smoothly. Up to what point? Up to the water level. From the deepest part of the well, you start drawing that rope. Bucket comes very easily, even though it is full of water. Even a child can draw it. But the moment the bucket reaches the water level, what happens? It becomes very difficult to draw the bucket out of the water level. Out of very water level. It cannot be drawn without great difficulty. In the same way, the beginning of our study in law or in literature or any faculty, any subject is like going deep into the well and drawing from there. You start drawing from the water level, it's very difficult, but go deeper, go deeper, go deepest part. You get wonderful water, effortless, very easy, and so much we get it. So I say, so although the beginning of study of law or literature looks very difficult in the beginning, yet when you go deep into the depth, it is delightful, it is very easier and without any heavy burden, so long as he keeps himself in his proper elements. This is the the effect of having an acquaintance with literature, acquaintance with law. A great American judge by name Learned Hand, he has said every judge must have some bowing acquaintance. It doesn't say deep knowledge, bowing acquaintance with literature, with philosophy, or with history, with biography. All the great authors of the world, read them. They will tell you what human nature is. And by knowing human nature, we can do our job very well in society. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very grateful to this wonderful institute for giving me this opportunity to deliver my maiden lecture. And I know that you had the good fortune of listening to great writers, great authors. List of names which I say makes me feel very, very small and very shy, because such galaxies of persons had the good fortune to come and share their thoughts with you. And for giving me this wonderful opportunity, I once again thank the S.R. Ramakrishnan, Secretary of this Public Affairs Institute. I thank Mr. Krishnamurthy, who came to me and in the beginning and told me about the institute. I also thank my classmate in my post-graduation in law, Mr. Chandrasekhar, who is not only an advocate and he has got the same taste in literature and other subjects. I thank all of you, and I thank most importantly this wonderful audience who I believe have listened to me with great patience and with encouraging signs. I thank one and all for this wonderful opportunity given to me to talk to you about literature and law. Thank you very much.
ಸೊ ಅವರ ಟೀಚಿಂಗ್ ಎಬಿಲಿಟಿ ಏನು ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಆಗಲೇ ನೋಡಿದ್ದೀವಿ. ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಹೌ ಲಿಟ್ರೇಚರ್ ಗಿವ್ಸ್ ಎನ್ ಇನ್ಸೈಟ್ ಇನ್ ಟು ಹ್ಯೂಮನ್ ನೇಚರ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಈಸ್ ದೇರ್ ಫಾರ್ ಕ್ರೂಷಲಿ ರೆಲೆವೆಂಟ್ ಟು ಸ್ಟಡಿ ಆಫ್ ಲಾ. ಇದನ್ನು ಬಹಳ ಸ್ವಾರಸ್ಯವಾಗಿ ತಿಳಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಹೌ ಲೈಕ್ ಏರ್ ಲಾ ಈಸ್ ಆಲ್ ಎನ್ವೆಲಪಿಂಗ್ ಅಂತ ತಿಳಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಲಾ ಎನ್ಶೋರ್ಸ್ ಪೀಸ್ ಇನ್ ದಿ ವರ್ಲ್ಡ್. ಜಸ್ಟಿಸ್ ಈಸ್ ದಿ ಲಿಗಮೆಂಟ್ ವಿಚ್ ಹೋಲ್ಡ್ಸ್ ದಿ ಹೋಲ್ ಸೊಸೈಟಿ ಟುಗೆದರ್. ಆ ಅಂಶ ಹೇಳಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಎಲ್ಲಕ್ಕಿಂತ ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿ ದಿ ಪವರ್ ಆಫ್ ಲಿಟ್ರೇಚರ್, ಶೇಕ್ಸ್ಪಿಯರ್, ಮಿಲ್ಟನ್ ಮೊದಲಾದ ಅನೇಕ ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗಳ ಮೂಲಕ ಹೇಳಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ನಾವು ಬೇರೆ ಸಂದರ್ಭಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲವು ಕಡೆ ಪಾಠ ಮಾಡುವ ಸಂದರ್ಭ ಬಂದಾಗ ಹೇಳೋದುಂಟು, ನಿಮಗೆ ಇಂಗ್ಲೆಂಡಿನ ಚರಿತ್ರೆಯ ಪರಿಜ್ಞಾನ ಬೇಕಾದರೆ ನೀವು ಟೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಬುಕ್ ಆಫ್ ಹಿಸ್ಟ್ರಿ ಓದಬೇಡಿ, ಡಿಕನ್ಸ್ ನಾವೆಲ್ಸ್ ಓದಿ, ಯು ಗೆಟ್ ಎ ಬೆಟರ್ ನಾಲೆಡ್ಜ್ ಆಫ್ 18th century ಇಂಗ್ಲೆಂಡ್ ಅಂತ ಅನೇಕ ಕಡೆ ಹೇಳಿದ್ದು ಉಂಟು. ಡಿಕನ್ಸ್ನ ಟೇಲ್ ಆಫ್ ಟೂ ಸಿಟೀಸ್ ಆಗಲಿ, ಆಲಿವರ್ ಟ್ವಿಸ್ಟ್ ಆಗಲಿ, ಡೇವಿಡ್ ಕಾಪರ್ಫೀಲ್ಡ್ ಆಗಲಿ, ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಏನು ಇಂಗ್ಲೆಂಡಿನ ಚಿತ್ರ ನಿಮಗೆ ಸಿಗುತ್ತೆ ಅದು ಯಾವ ಹಿಸ್ಟ್ರಿ ಟೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಬುಕ್ನಲ್ಲೂ ನಿಮಗೆ ಸಿಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಸೋಷಲ್ ಕಂಡೀಷನ್ಸ್ ಆರ್ ರಿಫ್ಲೆಕ್ಟೆಡ್ ಎಫೆಕ್ಟಿವ್ಲಿ ಇನ್ ಲಿಟ್ರೇಚರ್. ಡಾಸ್ಟೋವ್ಸ್ಕಿ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ದೆನ್ ಲಿಟ್ರೇಚರ್ ಅಲ್ಟಿಮೇಟ್ಲಿ ಈಸ್ ನಥಿಂಗ್ ಬಟ್ ಎ ಗ್ಯಾಲರಿ ಆಫ್ ಪೋರ್ಟ್ರೇಟ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ವೆರೈಟಿ ಆಫ್ ಪರ್ಸನ್ಸ್ ಇನ್ ಸೊಸೈಟಿ. ಎಡ್ವರ್ಡ್ ಕೋಕ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ದೆನ್ ಹೌ ಲಿಟ್ರೇಚರ್ ಹ್ಯಾಸ್ ಇನ್ಫ್ಲೂಯೆನ್ಸ್ಡ್ ಲೆಜಿಸ್ಲೇಷನ್, ಅದನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ಸ್ಪರ್ಶ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು. ಸಮಯ ಇದ್ದರೆ ಹುಡ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ಮೆನ್ಷನ್ಡ್ ಅರ್ಲ್ ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾನ್ಲಿ ಗಾರ್ಡ್ನರ್. ಅರ್ಲ್ ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾನ್ಲಿ ಗಾರ್ಡ್ನರ್ ಇಸ್ ಅ ನಾವೆಲಿಸ್ಟ್, ಬಟ್ ಅವನ ಕಾದಂಬರಿಗಳಿಂದಾಗಿ ಎಷ್ಟೋ ಲೀಗಲ್ ರಿಫಾರ್ಮ್ಸ್ಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಅವಕಾಶ ಆಯಿತು. ಬಾಲ್ಜಾಕ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು. ಹೀಗೆ ಇದು ಎಷ್ಟು ಸ್ವಾರಸ್ಯವಾದ ವಿಷಯ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳೋದು ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಹೋದ ಹಾಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗತ್ತೆ. ಇದು ಒಟ್ಟಿನ ಮೇಲೆ ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಮೇಲ್ಗಡೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಗ್ರಂಥ ಭಂಡಾರದಲ್ಲಿ DVG ಅವರು ಅಧ್ಯಯನ ಮಾಡಿದ ಪುಸ್ತಕಗಳು 100 ಇವೆ. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಅನೇಕ ಲೀಗಲ್ ಟೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಇದೆ. ಅವರಿಗೆ ಈ ಕರ್ಮ ಯಾಕೆ ಬೇಕಾಗಿತ್ತು ಅಂತ ನಮಗೆ ಆಶ್ಚರ್ಯ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಯಾವುದೋ ಜನರಲ್ ವರ್ಕ್ಸ್ ಮಾತ್ರ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಸ್ಯಾಲ್ಮಂಡ್ ಆನ್ ಜ್ಯೂರಿಸ್ಪ್ರುಡೆನ್ಸ್ ಇಂಥದ್ದು ಮಾತ್ರ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಈವನ್ ಆ್ಯನ್ಸನ್ ಆನ್ ಕಾಂಟ್ರ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ ಇಂಥ ಟೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಬುಕ್ಗಳು ಕೂಡ ಸ್ಕ್ರಿಪ್ಲಸ್ಸಾಗಿ ಓದಿ ಮಾರ್ಜಿನಲ್ ನೋಟ್ಸ್ DVG ಮಾಡಿರೋದನ್ನು ನಮ್ಮ ಗ್ರಂಥ ಭಂಡಾರದಲ್ಲಿ ನೋಡ್ಬೋದು. ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಯಾಕೆ ಬೇಕಾಗಿತ್ತು ಅದು ದೇವರಿಗೇನೆ ಗೊತ್ತು. ಆದರೆ ಈ ಕ್ಲಾಸಿಕಲ್ ಸ್ಕಾಲರ್ಶಿಪ್ಪಿನ ರೀತಿ ಅದು ಅಷ್ಟೇ. ಹಾಗೆಯೇ ಎನಿಬಡಿ ಹೂ ಕ್ಲೈಮ್ ಟು ಬಿ ಎ ಸ್ಕಾಲರ್ ಹ್ಯಾಡ್ ಟು ಬಿ ಫ್ಯಾಮಿಲಿಯರ್ ವಿತ್ ಬೇಸಿಕ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಲಾ. ಅದು ಹಿಂದೆ ಇಟ್ ವಾಸ್ ಆನ್ ಅಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಟೆಡ್ ಪ್ರಿನ್ಸಿಪಲ್. ಈಗ ಬಿಡಿ, ಈಗ ಸಂದರ್ಭ ಬೇರೆ ಇದೆ. ಆದರೆ ಕ್ಲಾಸಿಕಲ್ ಸ್ಕಾಲರ್ಸ್ ಎಲ್ಲನೂ ದೇ ವೆಂಟ್ ಥ್ರೂ ಸಚ್ ಡಿಸಿಪ್ಲಿನ್. ಇದರ ಹೇಗೆ ಲಿಟ್ರೇಚರ್ ಮತ್ತು ಲಾ ಇದರ ಸಂಬಂಧ ಹೇಗೆ ಇದೆ, ಲಿಟ್ರೇಚರ್ನ ಗ್ರೌಂಡಿಂಗ್ ಹೇಗೆ ಲಾನ ಇನ್ಫ್ಲೂಯೆನ್ಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಬಂದಿದೆ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನು ಭಾಳ ಸ್ವಾರಸ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಜಸ್ಟಿಸ್ ವಿ ಜಗನ್ನಾಥ್ ಅವರು ಹೇಳಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ತಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರ ಪರವಾಗಿ, ಗೋಖಲೆ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಯ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಹಾಗೂ ಪ್ರಾಯೋಜಕರ ಪರವಾಗಿ ನ್ಯಾಯಮೂರ್ತಿ ಜಗನ್ನಾಥ್ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಕೃತಜ್ಞತೆಗಳನ್ನ ಅರ್ಪಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇನೆ. ಶ್ರೀಮಾನ್ H.G. ಸೋಮಶೇಖರ್ ರಾಯರು ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು ವೇದಿಕೆಗೆ ಬಂದು ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸಕರನ್ನು ಗೌರವಿಸಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಕೇಳ್ಕೊತೇನೆ.